And
Can I say something now? Madam Secretary, I'm going to say it again. You're a lot smarter than me. But my mama didn't raise a fool. And if she did, it was one of my brothers. And what you're doing, you know it and I know it. And all those people sitting behind you know it. You're paying 5% to borrow money when you could pay 4% to borrow money. You announced you were going to do that back in November 2023. You're working cross purposes with Jay Powell, who's
we're not working.
And the reason you're doing this, is try to give the economy a sugar high 5 months before an election. Now, you know that, and I know that.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Capital Insights. Today we're diving into a heated exchange that's shaking up Washington. Senator John Kennedy just took Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to task over some seriously questionable financial decisions. Buckle up, because this gets intense. So here's the deal. Kennedy drops a bombshell right off the bat. Our current fiscal year deficit is sitting at a whopping $1.6 trillion. That's right, trillion with a T. We're talking about the government spending way more than it's bringing in. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Kennedy starts grilling Yellen on why the Treasury is borrowing money at higher short-term interest rates instead of locking in lower long-term rates. We're talking about a difference between 5.4% and 4.4%. That might not sound like much, but when we're dealing with trillions of dollars, it adds up fast. Yellen tries to defend the Treasury's strategy, saying they're trying to issue debt at the lowest cost over time. She claims they're not trying to time the market, but Kennedy's not buying it. He points out a press release from November where the Treasury announced plans to increase short-term borrowing. Yellen argues that market participants expect short-term rates to decline, but is that really the whole story? Here's where Kennedy really turns up the heat. He accuses Yellen of working against the Federal Reserve's efforts to reduce inflation, but it gets even spicier. Kennedy suggests this whole borrowing strategy is an attempt to give the economy a sugar high just 5 months before an election. Talk about a bombshell accusation. Yellen, of course, denies all of this. She claims their policy is in line with recommendations from the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee. But Kennedy's not letting up, insisting that borrowing at higher rates when lower ones are available just doesn't make sense.
We're spending $1.6 trillion more than we're taking in revenues. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And we're filling the hole by borrowing money. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, if you personally were borrowing money, would you rather pay 5.4% interest or 4.4% interest?
The less the better.
Ma'am?
The less the better.
Okay. Then why aren't you doing that with federal borrowing?
Well, in federal borrowing, our objective is to issue at least cost over time and not to try to time the market.
Yeah, but you are timing the market. You issued a press release back in November that you were going to try to time the market. I mean, right now, you can issue 3-month treasuries. These are yesterday's yields at roughly 5.4%.
Yes.
But you could issue a 10-year Treasury note for 4.4% and save. Let me just finish. And save the taxpayer a lot of money. And then last November, you issued a press release. You said we're going to start borrowing more short-term debt than we normally would. At the beginning of 2023, our short-term debt was about 15%. And last November, you said we're going to increase that.
To about.
And now it's about 22, 23%.
Correct.
You're costing the taxpayers billions. Why are you doing that?
So, Senator, you say it costs 5.4%. That's what it costs this year.
No, that's what it cost yesterday.
Yes, but when you issue 10-year bonds, you're locking in the 10-year rate over 10 years. And that 10-year rate, the reason that holders of 10-year Treasury bonds are willing to accept a 4.3, 4.4% yield is because when those same individuals could be investing at 5.4%.
Madam Secretary.
No, I'm sorry, I would like to.
Madam Secretary, that's just, no offense. That's double talk.
It isn't
Here's
double
my
talk because
maybe
it
it's
is
my fault.
expected
Maybe
that
it's my
interest-
fault.
No,
Today, you can borrow for 3 months at 5.4%, but instead you're choosing, strike that. Today, you can borrow for 10 years at 4.4%. Instead, you're choosing to borrow at 5.4%.
market participants believe that.
That makes no sense.
Market participants believe that short-term interest rates will come down, and they will come down to a level substantially
So you are
below
trying to time the market.
current 10-year rate.
You are trying to time the
And
market.
so, no, it isn't a question of timing the market. It's we issue across the curve in a regular and predictable way.
You don't.
And
You
the reason
announced
that
you announced last November, I can show you the press release, where you said that we have decided to start issuing an inordinately large amount of short-term debt, didn't you?
we did make an announcement
And
about
because of the inverted yield curve, that means that you're going to pay more in interest on short-term debt than, say, 10-year debt.
only for a short time.
Now, that's a fact, okay? You can go check the numbers of Treasuries yesterday. That is, first, that costs taxpayers a lot more money in interest. And number two, you're working at cross purposes with the Federal Reserve, because what you're doing is stimulating the market. You're pumping money into the economy. And Jay Powell is over here beavering away, trying to reduce inflation. And you're beavering away, trying to increase it by
There's nothing
paying
that we're doing
an interest
that's-
rate that is 100 basis points higher than you would have to pay. And the only reason I can figure that y'all are doing that is to try to give the economy a sugar high 5 months before an election. Why else would anybody want to borrow at 5% when you can borrow at 4%?
Well, there is a good reason that investors are willing to accept just over 4% on a 10-year Treasury bond when they can earn 5.4% on a one-year Treasury bill.
I'm not worried about the investor.
Well,
I'm
the
not worried
same-
about the investor.
it's
I'm
the
worried
same-
about the taxpayer.
It's the same
And let me
logic.
ask you again, because I'm going to run out of time. And look, you're smarter than me. I know that. But I can grasp this concept. You're borrowing at 5% when you could borrow at 4% to deficit spend.
If I borrow it,
And
if
it
I
makes absolutely no sense to me why you
I
would
am
do
sorry,
that,
if I
other
the
than
reason
to try
is-
to artificially stimulate the economy
If
and
I
help Joe
borrow
Biden
at
get
4%,
reelected.
if I borrow at 4.5%, I'm locking in that cost over 10 years.
but you just
If
said
I
you weren't
borrow
trying
at
to time the
5
market.
Well,
You are trying to time the market.
it isn't trying to time the market because this is something that is a regular part of our policy. When short-term rates are high, it is and long-term rates are lower. The reason for that is that market participants expect short rates to go down, and they expect them to decline over 10 years to substantially under 4.5%. So even if we pay more this year than it would cost to borrow at a 10-year rate of 4.5%, the expected cost over the 10-year life of that borrowing can be the same or less than it would be if we issued a 10-year note. Now, we're not trying to time the market. We have a policy that we want to hold the issuance of short-term bills in line with recommendations of the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee.
Can I say something now? Madam Secretary, I'm going to say it again. You're a lot smarter than me. But my mama didn't raise a fool, and if she did, it was one of my brothers. And what you're doing, you know it and I know it, and all those people sitting behind you know it. You're paying 5% to borrow money when you could pay 4% to borrow money. You announced you were going to do that back in November 2023. You're working cross purposes with Jay Powell, who's
We're not working.
And the reason you're doing this, is try to give the economy a sugar high 5 months before an election. Now, you know that, and I know that.
All right, folks, that's the breakdown of this explosive exchange. We've got trillion-dollar deficits, questionable borrowing practices, and accusations of pre-election economic manipulation. What do you think is really going on here? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, if you want to stay up to date on all the latest political and economic drama, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next in this wild ride. Until next time, this is Capital Insights signing off.